Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Why No One Plays. It's a series where I talk about unpopular champions in League of Legends, especially within the past few years. And for today, let's talk about Kled, the High Major Commodore of the 1st Legion 3rd Multiplication Double Admiral Artillery Vanguard Company. That is actually one of his titles, if you go to the wiki. If this is your first time watching one of these videos, I just want to establish that obviously people do play Kled, but the point of Why No One Plays is to bring forth discussion about what makes them not an appealing champion to the general player base, and hopefully, this video can also raise more awareness about the champion and encourage some viewers to give him a try. I think it's becoming apparent that there are a lot of pocket pick top laners because so far I've covered Rumble, Alawi, Teemo, Cho'Gath, Tahm Kench to some extent, Yorick, Kayle, Poppy, Nasus, and Singed. Almost half of all the champions I've covered so far are top laners, and based on the future ones I've planned, it will still be half of all champions in the series for quite a long time. That's primarily because top lane has the largest pool of champions in any role, mostly because all the pocket picks go up there since they don't fit in any other. Naturally, this also means there's a lot of competition with pick rates because the roster is so saturated, but the other aspect about Kled that impacts his viability as a main is that he's a Yordle. Having covered Heimerdinger, Teemo, Poppy, Rumble, Ziggs, and Corki so far, you'll notice that the Yordles are not a very popular category of champions to main. And contrary to popular belief, it's not because they're small, mischievous, and annoying little pieces of garbage. At least not entirely. All 13 Yordles in League of Legends are either counter picks or anti-carries. Looking at the selection on screen, you'll notice right away that none of these champions are exactly a common sight over the long history of League of Legends. Certainly not as consistently picked in comparison to Lee Sin, Yasuo, Lucian, Thresh to name a few. Yordles work best as counters to certain enemy team compositions. Kled is one such champion who just takes this to the very extreme. In terms of gameplay, he's of the skirmisher subclass, champions who excel in close quarters combat with at most 3 people on each side. These champions are very dangerous to take on alone and can usually be effective even without their ultimate, which lends credence to their consistency and why so many of them are popular picks. So why is Kled such an uncommon pick despite being part of arguably one of the most popular subclasses in the game? Let's start first by going over what makes him so unique. Kled's entire gimmick is that he's actually 2 characters, himself and Skarl, his finest destrier. Or maybe not so fine. Anyway, he has 2 health bars, the lizard and himself. To get to him, you have to first take out his mount. Q also changes whether you're mounted or dismounted. The rest of its abilities are easy to understand for the most part, but that passive has so much you have to understand before you can even begin to play Kled effectively, and it's also the most contributing factor to why people don't like to play him. While other champions like Elise, Rek'Sai, Nidalee, Jace have 2 separate forms, functionally they have one playstyle and synergize with one another. For example, Rek'Sai's burrowed form makes it easier for her to pinpoint and reach targets, which then switches to base form for the damage. Jace can engage melee for the bulk of his burst, and then he can switch to range to finish the job if his target runs away. Alternatively, he can begin in ranged form for a chunk of damage and then switch to melee for the kill. Kled's 2 forms, mounted and dismounted, are 2 completely different champions. When mounted, he becomes a dangerous high mobility diver who routinely ignores what's going on around him and just focuses on his target. When dismounted, he has to play more carefully, using his pocket pistol to build up courage as quickly as possible to get Skarl back for a second round. The contingency is that you as the player have absolutely no say in when Kled switches forms. While it's not as inconsistent as Gnar's rage mechanic, it's difficult to figure out when during a fight you will dismount. As a result, unless you have hundreds of games of experience on Kled, it's almost impossible to predict how much damage you will take to the point where you lose Skarl and have to abandon everything you were doing before to prioritize self-preservation. One way a good Kled player can circumvent this is to keep track of incoming damage. This normally isn't too difficult to get the hang of in lane since you have only one opponent, but in 3v3s or full-on 5v5 team fights where there's so much happening all at once, even challengers will have a hard time discerning when they'll be forcefully dismounted. And so they'll have to be ready to switch from a screw-you-all type offense to retreating defense at a moment's notice, something near impossible to predict correctly in a game as volatile and unpredictable as League of Legends. You might have a fight where you stay mounted the entire time and 1v9 raid boss all the ADCs in existence, or you could get bursted instantly and be completely useless. You might say this applies to a lot of champions who get focused down right away, but the onus is greater on Kled since he completely loses all of his offensive options when dismounted, aside from violent tendencies, at which point you're about 1 or 2 heart attacks from death, so you have to get Skarl back very quickly. Why this is a bad thing is because when you have 2 different playstyles on a champion in which you have no control over when you get to take on which, that leads to inconsistency. Now, I know I sound like a broken record about this, but consistency is the #1 reason why a champion can have either a high pick rate or a low one, whether that's inconsistent matchups, inconsistent combos, or inconsistent abilities. Unfortunately for Kled, he struggles with all three. Skirmishers are notorious for being very high threat targets that don't require much setup. Someone like Jax, Kayn, Fiora, Riven, Tryndamere, Yone, Master Yi can go 0 to 100 almost instantly the moment a fight breaks out, which again is one of the reasons why they're very popular to one-trick. Heck, even the new champion Viego has little problem starting fights right away. On top of the fact that you can be rendered virtually useless when dismounted, all of Kled's abilities are conditional, with 2 of them being unusable in a sudden engage. Bear Trap on a Rope is a 2-part tether ability, not unlike LeBlanc's Ethereal Chains. This ability can deal overwhelming amounts of damage if both parts of Q land successfully, but the catch is the tether range gradually decreases over the 1 3/4 of a second you have to wait before triggering the pull. Because the tether range goes down to 650 by the end of the duration, you basically can only use Q in melee range to guarantee the second part. Doing so in range would force you to burn your dash, which usually means you won't get the second dash unless you're already close up. Champions who have either high mobility or self-peel can break that tether because of how short it is, meaning against certain matchups or enemy team compositions you lose a quarter of your entire damage. Of course, this isn't a problem if the entire enemy team is full of slow, immobile champions, but there's more dashes in the game now than ever before, including Gale Force, which can be used to break tether or just dodge the ability altogether. It makes AD carries that much harder to deal with as Kled, who specializes in diving the backline. Up next is Violent Tendencies. It essentially is Hail of Blades as an ability. When off cooldown, Kled gets a massive attack speed buff on his next 4 basic attacks, with the 4th one doing massive damage. What makes this ability inconsistent is that it automatically activates when you attack something. Anything. Minions, monsters, even wards. Other multi-hitters like Shinzao's 3-talent strike or Set's knuckle down can be activated, while Kled's can't. This means in lane, or in a team fight, you'll have to hope that your opponents aren't keeping track of your W cooldown because that's a lot of your damage gone if it's not available. And you have to make a choice on whether you want to use it to CS minions or preserve it in case the fight is about to happen. This isn't the only ability of its kind. Urgot's passive Echoing Flames also activates involuntarily, but even that can be managed by simply watching your position on Urgot. And by level 10 to 13, the cooldown is so low anyway, it doesn't make a difference if you waste a shotgun. No matter how Galaxy 300 IQ big brain you are, no one can reliably predict when a fight will happen and Violent Tendencies will be up in time. I mean, I suppose later on when the cooldown is only 5 to 6 seconds, you can say it's short enough to be used more liberally, but early on it has an innate cooldown of 14 seconds. That is a very long time to be without a very important ability. Jousting is his most, normal ability. It's a straight line dash that deals damage, and if you happen to hit an enemy champion, you can target dash through them again for extra damage. It does bear a lot of resemblance to Renekton's Slice and Dice, although more stringent on its usage because you can't control where the second dash goes, and limits its usefulness to being mostly stick potential. Not a bad ability by any means, but you can't say double dash through minions to get a certain target like you can on Renekton. Finally comes his ultimate, Charge. Pick a spot on the map and go guns blazing towards it until you either make it to your destination or lock onto an enemy champion. It chases them and deals damage while you get a shield, both of which increases based on the distance traveled. Once again, unless you're specifically trying to make a pick, you have no say in who Kled attacks because he just targets the first champion on sight. And while you can technically use Charge at point blank range, it does almost no damage, meaning this ult's full value can be lost to you even if you do use it from full range because you might just splat onto the enemy tank. It's a good supportive ability since it gives your allies crazy movement speed as well, but all in all, it's one of the least reliable semi-global ultimates in the game because of how easy it is to mess up. It's extremely difficult to make use of the full power of every single ability in a single instance because they all have their own unique form of uncertainty. If you watch my video on Poppy, there is a bit of familiarity between the two Yordles. Despite being considered a diver in 5v5 teamfights, Kled is missing 2 major tools in his kit that just about every diver has, like Vi, Hecarim, Diana, and Camille, those being hard crowd control or huge area damage. Vi and Camille are a bit lackluster when it comes to area coverage, but they more than make up for it with incredible lockdown potential. On the other hand, we have Hecarim and Diana with ridiculous AoE damage, especially if everyone clumps up together. Kled on the other hand has neither. His only real form of hard crowd control is the tiny yank that comes from his bear trap, and even then, you would be hard pressed to call that lockdown. Plus, his entire kit is single target. If you combine all of those things together, Kled is very inefficient at being a diver, and even in skirmishes, his pressure is only really effective if players don't know what he does, which to his credit, very few people do, because so few people play Kled. He has the highest base HP in the game thanks to Skarl, and because of his courage mechanic, he can essentially have 2 Skarls worth of health bars if the enemy team does not focus him. And because of his YOLO playstyle of speed blitzing the backline in teamfights, he can be very dangerous given his deceptively high burst damage and equally high resilience. But that damage is not reliable. Kled in most instances can be way stronger than Riven, stronger than Fiora, stronger than Hecarim, stronger than Renekton. He can be stronger than any of those champions if he just wasn't so conditional. His greatest strength is that he's very good at chasing people down and overwhelming them with focus, commitment, and sheer will. True to his character, Kled is literally insane. But practically speaking, his margin for error is so thin that he can either 1v9 or be completely worthless. You don't want to have that on a champion with that role. That's why most hard engagers have either point and click abilities or generous hitboxes. Malphite ultimate is really hard to miss because of how fast and how big it is. Vi and Camille press the R button and instantly tag on to someone. Jarvan IV has fast long distance engage, things like that. In a sense, Kled is the top lane version of Kindred, whom I covered in my last Why No One Plays. In order to play Kled well, you have to put in so much work just to get him to a level equal to his peers, and then even more work to get the extra benefits. You have to put in minimum like 200 games worth of limit testing to understand what Kled can and can't survive so as not to dismount too early or when you're not prepared for it. You have to adjust your playstyle and wave management to make sure you have violent tendencies up at the right place at the right time. What's interesting is that despite Kled being the most insane, psychotic, mentally deranged Yordle in the game, you as the player have to remain calm, especially during those team fights. It is very easy to tunnel vision on a target as Kled, that's what his whole playstyle is about. But to play him well, you need immaculate presence of mind to understand where you are in the fight, who you have to focus, when to back away to buy time for your cooldowns, how to stay in the fight to accumulate courage, all while being very close to death. The worst thing you can do on Kled is panic. That would be the number reason why I think not many people like to pick him up, because he's very hard to play since he doesn't have any get out of jail free cards or insta-kill point and click abilities the way other champions do. He's an anti-carry designed to shut down enemy carries as hard and fast as possible, but he's so incredibly hard to play, perhaps even harder than Kindred, in a role where there are so many brain-dead easy champions like Darius, Pantheon, Camille, Renekton, Set, so on and so forth, that it begs the question, why even go through all that trouble? And there you have it, my thoughts on why no one plays Kled. I definitely left out a lot of other reasons, but I've been talking for a long time now, so let's just call it there. Please tell me your thoughts on Kled if you think Riot made him too unforgiving or if you think he's fine as is. I definitely think he's in a good spot right now. Like I said before, in a similar fashion to Kindred, there's nothing really inherently wrong with this kit, he's just almost too hard to play, with a lot of things you have to micromanage and very little room for mistakes. But if you main Kled and think there's something about him that's weak, or if you think he should have some more forgiving elements to his kit, I'd love to hear about that too. Thank you to everyone who watched all the way to the end. If you enjoyed the video, a rating would be much appreciated. And if you'd like to support my channel, best way you can do so is leave a comment, share this with your friends, and subscribe. Once again, I have a playlist in the description below as well as links to my Discord, Patreon, and Twitch if you want to watch some more content and follow me on other platforms. But for now, that's it for today. Thank you all so much for watching, and I hope to see you again soon for the next video. Take care.